About 13.8 billion years ago, everything that exists, every galaxy, every star, every atom in your body, was compressed into a space smaller than the period at the end of this sentence. Then it exploded. Not like a bomb exploding into space. More like space itself was the explosion. Every direction you could possibly point was the center. Physics basically wrote its own rule book in the first 3 minutes, and one of those rules was hydrogen exists now. That's it. That's the universe's first move. Just hydrogen. Everywhere. The universe spent its first few 100 million years in pitch darkness, just clouds of gas drifting around. Scientists actually call this era the Cosmic Dark Ages, which sounds like the title of a bad fantasy novel, but it's completely real. Then something incredible happened. The gas started clumping. Gravity pulled it tighter, 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 until the pressure got so intense that hydrogen atoms slammed into each other and fused, releasing unimaginable amounts of light and heat. The first stars switched on, and the universe, for the first time in hundreds of millions of years, finally had light. But here's the part nobody talks about. Those first stars were monsters. Some of them were hundreds of times larger than our sun. And when they died, they didn't go quietly. They exploded in supernovas so powerful they forged entirely new elements, carbon, oxygen, iron, gold, and scattered them across the cosmos. Every atom of gold on Earth was born inside a dying star. Let that sink in for a second. About 4.5 billion years ago, our solar system was just a spinning disk of leftover gas and debris around a newborn sun. Rocks smashed into rocks. Rocks smashed into bigger rocks. Eventually, one of those rocks got so big it started attracting everything nearby. More crashes, more heat. The whole thing melted into a ball of magma. That's Earth. That's home. Early Earth was not a nice place. But then something happened that might be the single most important event in the entire history of life on this planet, and most people have never heard of it. A planet roughly the size of Mars slammed directly into Earth. The collision was so catastrophic that chunks of both planets were flung into orbit. Those chunks eventually coalesced into a single object. We call it the Moon. But here's why this matters. That impact also tilted Earth on its axis, giving us seasons. It stabilized our orbit, giving us a predictable climate. The Moon's gravity created tidal patterns, and those tidal pools, billions of years later, may have been the exact nurseries where life first learned to exist. One apocalyptic crash, and it accidentally set up the perfect conditions for everything that followed. For about 1 billion years after Earth formed, nothing lived here. Just rock, ocean, and the occasional volcanic tantrum. Then, somewhere around 3.8 billion years ago, in the early oceans, something impossibly small figured out how to copy itself. The first life on Earth was a single cell. No brain, no mouth, no plan. Just a tiny chemical reaction that could replicate. And it was unstoppable. For 2 billion years, that's twice as long as complex life has existed, Earth was ruled entirely by microbes. Bacteria owned this planet. They lived in boiling vents, in frozen ice, in acid. And one type of bacteria, called cyanobacteria, quietly pulled off the most consequential act of environmental terrorism in history. They started producing oxygen. At the time, oxygen was toxic to most life on Earth. This single-celled bacterial bloom basically poisoned the atmosphere and wiped out the dominant life forms of the era in an event scientists call the Great Oxidation Event, mass extinction, caused by photosynthesis. But for the survivors, oxygen turned out to be rocket fuel. It enabled more complex metabolism, more complex cells. Eventually, cells started eating other cells, and instead of dying, they became partners. That's how you got cells with a nucleus. That's how you eventually got you. Fast forward about 500 million years ago. The oceans are absolutely teeming with life. And then, almost overnight, in geological terms, something incredible happens. The Cambrian explosion. In just a few million years, almost every major body plan of animal life on Earth appeared simultaneously. Eyes evolved, claws evolved, predators evolved. For the first time, something could look at something else and decide it was lunch. Life would never be peaceful again. Over the next 400 million years, life conquered land, developed spines, grew wings, and got absolutely enormous. We're talking dinosaurs, creatures that make modern elephants look like golden retrievers. But the dinosaurs aren't the most interesting part of their era. The most interesting part is what ended them. About 66 million years ago, a rock roughly 12 kilometers wide entered the atmosphere at 70,000 kilometers per hour. The impact in what is now Mexico released more energy than 1 billion nuclear bombs. It triggered wildfires across continents, threw debris into the stratosphere that blocked sunlight for years, and collapsed the food chain from the bottom up. 3/4 of all species on Earth went extinct. But in the cold, dark aftermath, small, furry, warm-blooded creatures emerged from underground burrows. They had survived by being tiny, by eating anything, by being flexible. Those were our ancestors. We only exist because a rock killed the dinosaurs. Now here's where things get weird. Evolution is slow, until suddenly it isn't. About 6 million years ago, our lineage split from chimpanzees. For millions of years, various human-like species wandered Africa. Different brain sizes, different tools, different strategies. Most of them didn't make it. Then, around 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens appeared. We weren't the strongest, we weren't the fastest, we had no natural armor, no venom, no wings, but we had something no other animal had ever developed to quite the same degree. We could tell each other stories, not just communicate danger. Actually construct shared realities, gods, laws, nations, money, things that don't physically exist, but which thousands or millions of people can agree to believe in simultaneously. That invisible technology, collective imagination, let us cooperate at scales no other animal can match. About 70,000 years ago, humans left Africa in significant numbers. We walked across deserts, crossed oceans on rafts, and in roughly 50,000 years, colonized every continent on Earth except Antarctica. We moved in. Every large predator that had evolved without us started going extinct. Woolly mammoths, giant sloths, cave lions disappeared. Around 12,000 years ago, something changed everything again: farming. Instead of chasing food, we grew it. Surplus food meant some people didn't have to farm. Those people became priests, soldiers, scribes, rulers. Villages became cities. Cities became empires. Writing was invented, and suddenly humans could accumulate knowledge across generations. Everything after that? It's basically a blur of the same pattern repeating at accelerating speed. Empires rise, empires fall, ideas spread, technology compounds, the printing press, the scientific revolution, the industrial revolution, electricity, antibiotics, the internet. Every 500 years, the world becomes unrecognizable. Here's the thing that nobody ever tells you about history. It didn't have to go this way. At 100 different moments, the asteroid, the bacteria, the ice ages, the plagues, the wars, the whole chain could have broken. The universe had no reason to make stars. Stars had no obligation to forge heavy elements. Earth had no plan to get hit by another planet at exactly the right angle. Life had no guarantee of surviving mass extinctions. Your ancestors had no certainty they'd survive a single brutal winter, let alone live long enough to pass on their genes. And yet, here you are, sitting somewhere, watching a video on a glowing rectangle. Every single human alive today is the endpoint of an unbroken 3.8 billion year chain of survival. Not one of your ancestors, not a single one, died before they had children. Through volcanic winters, through ice ages, through plagues that wiped out half of Europe, through every predator and famine and catastrophe this planet threw at them. They made it, and because they made it, you exist. The history of the world isn't really a story about stars or dinosaurs or empires, it's a story about you, and the staggeringly unlikely miracle of the fact that you're here at all. Which honestly, might be the most remarkable thing in the entire universe. What part of history should we cover next? Drop it in the comments.